Hi, this is Stu Tinker from SK Tours in Derry, Maine, and I'm listening to the Stephen King podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Stephen King podcast. This is episode number 94, and this is your host, Lou Sytsma. I'm going solo for the first time without Hans, and that seems kind of appropriate since we'll be talking about the Fright Anthology, edited by Stephen King and Bev Vincent, as well as we'll be looking at episodes 2 through 6 of Mr. Mercedes from season 2, and, of course, all the latest news.
Welcome, welcome. Do not fear the door that lies before you. We will protect you. We are your guides, Hans and Lou, and we will give you the latest in Stephen King news. But before we do so, you must prove yourself worthy. You must open the door and join us in the death room.
All right, first up in the news, just a heads up to everybody, you should be checking out the AMC Eli Roth's History of Horror documentary series. It started airing on October 14th, and each week a new episode comes out. The first season has 7 episodes, and each episode has a topic. Zombies gets episode 1. Slashers, which I guess there's lots of them because episodes 2 and 3 are going to deal with them. And then in episode 4, The Demons Inside. Episode 5, Killer Creatures. Episode 6, Vampires. And then episode 7, Ghost Stories. And it's interesting on the site that they've listed it as season 1. So hopefully if it does well enough, this will be a continuing thing. And if Stephen King is one of the guests or interviewees that Eli Roth has on his show. He's also going to be talking to Quentin Tarantino, Jordan Peele, Jason Blum, Robert Englund, Linda Blair, Tippi Hedren, Rob Zombie, Haley Joel Osment, Jack Black, John Landis, Jamie Lee Curtis, and many more. So this really looks like it's going to be a who's who of horror, and really looking forward to checking out this series. It's been a banner year for Stephen King on AMC too. They just had the Saturday, October 20th, they had the Stephen King movie marathon, so that's pretty cool. Anyhow, just a heads up for anybody who might not have been aware of that. Eli Roth's History of Horror on AMC. Check it out. And now we're going to turn to movies. And the new Pet Sematary movie has finished filming, and we got the poster, which is a shot of Louis Creed walking up as at the crest of the deadfall, walking back out, I guess, towards the Pet Sematary, or maybe it's the Indian burial ground. It's hard to tell. I guess it must be the Indian burial ground because I don't see any forest. And the tag is "Sometimes Dead is Better," which, of course, was made pretty famous by Fred Wynn in portraying Jed, their next-door neighbor. And I have to say for myself, going into this new adaptation, which is coming out in April 2019, there's 2 things beholding from the original movie that I thought were really well done. First up was Fred Gwynne's portrayal of Jed. I thought he just really nailed that. It's probably the role of a lifetime for him, or performance of a lifetime for him as far as I'm concerned. And the other thing that this movie had working for it was, to me, the all-time creepiest cinematic cat in church. That gray cat with those eyes, that cat was spooky even before it got ran over. So yeah, we're really looking forward to seeing how this new cat's going to stack up. And the trailer landed the next day, and on October 17th. And it was quite interesting. It covered a lot of the beats that we saw covered in the original movie, but it also had a few new elements, one of which, of course, was the masked children. And that's an element that's not in the book or the first adaptation of Pet Sematary. So it'll be interesting to see how that's going to play out. I have a feeling that that's a flashback to the earlier times when Jed's telling about when somebody's son was resurrected after coming back from war. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But that could add an interesting flavor to the movie for sure. It looks good. We've got some interesting choices for casting and whatnot. Of course, Jonathan Lithgow is a fantastic actor. And it looks like he's going to be playing this version of Judd Crandall without the main accent, which I think is actually a smart idea because it will keep his performance separate from the one that Fred Gwynne did. So we'll have to see how that plays out. The rest of the cast looks really good. Jason Clarke, Amy Simons, who I got to admit, I've seen her in other things, but I haven't seen a lot of her. So I really can't comment on her. The children look really good. And the boy that's playing Gage, and I think I've heard a lot of other people say this as well, he really looks a lot like the kid from the first movie. So that's kind of creepy in itself. One thing that's not jumping out at me too much is the cat, this version of Church. To me, it just looks like he's having a bad hair day. So, of course, it's out of context. We'll have to see how that plays in the movie, but I'm still feeling that the Church from the original movie is much creepier than the one that we're getting. But we'll see how that plays out. We'll also we know that the sister from Rachel Creed is in this movie. If you watch carefully, you can see just a couple of quick shots of that character. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And I have to say, the first time I watched the trailer, because of those children in the mask, it threw me off a little bit because of that. But now that I've watched it a few times, I really do like how the trailer really builds up the creepiness factor. And it's a solid teaser trailer. I'm looking forward to seeing what the next one is going to be like. I assume there's going to be one more before this movie's released. And as somebody pointed out when I mentioned it, is that it doesn't have the wow factor that the first It trailer did. But, I mean, how many times has a trailer like that come along? And it's a little unfair to compare this one to the It trailer. So we'll just have to see. Just have to keep our fingers crossed that this is going to turn out to be something special. And yeah, we'll just hopefully get a better adaptation of the Pet Sematary story, because to me, it's King's all-time creepiest novel. And while there's aspects of the 1989 Mary Carpenter adaptation of the movie falls apart in the third act, because I just don't think that they were able to properly handle the breakdown of the family once Gage is resurrected. So we'll have to see how that plays out. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do there. But April's not that far away. It's coming up quick. Is Stephen King going to do another cameo in this? It's doubtful. But we'll have to keep our fingers crossed. It would be kind of cool if he did show up at least for one scene. Anyhow, there's a follow-up article that you can see at Sci-Fi Wire, dated October 17th, 2018, written by Don Kay. And it's an interview with the cat trainer, Melissa Millette, from London, Ontario, and in Canada. And it talks about how many cats they used to recast to play Church. And it turns out that there were 5. Should have been 9, but there's 5. And she talks about the differences between, say, handling cats versus dogs. But to keep our eye out, see if we can spot the differences between the various versions of Church and the filming that was taking place during location shooting in Montreal. On the video front, really looking forward to Tuesday, October 23rd, when the Blu-ray version of Maximum Overdrive is being released, and this is the loaded version of the disc. This is the first time Maximum Overdrive's been released on Blu-ray, and this is coming from Vestron Video, and it's got a couple of audio commentary tracks, one with Tony Magistrell, author of Hollywood's Stephen King, another one with actor and comedian Jonah Ray and Blumhouse film executive Ryan Turek. There's a new Truck Stop Tales featurette, interview with producer Martha De Laurentiis, a Rage Against the Machines featurette with actress Laura Harrington. There's Honeymoon Horrors, there's interviews with actor John Short and actor Yardley Smith. So some other featurettes, one with the makeup artist Dean Gates. There's some location feature looking at Wilmington, North Carolina, where the movie was filmed. And there's also a featurette on the resurrection of the Happy Toys Goblin called Goblin and Resurrectus. So, and then there's some theatrical trailers and TV spots and things of that nature. So really looking forward to seeing this upgraded version of the disc and all these special features. It should be a lot of fun. And that is out on October 23rd, and which is tomorrow. I'm recording on the 22nd, so hopefully I'll have that and soon this week, and definitely will be including a more in-depth review of this disc in the next podcast, so that's something to keep an eye out for. Last news item, one that I'm touching upon now because it's some news about what's going on with Dr. Sleep, which is being filmed by and directed by Mike Flanagan, who is on a hot streak. And I think the excitement level for Dr. Sleep, for me, definitely has gone up because of what I've seen that he's done with Gerald's Game, and right now the just released Netflix series A Haunting of Hill House, which is a revisioning or a reimagining actually of the originally Shirley Jackson novel by Flanagan. And I think he's just done a fantastic job here. And the family drama that the series is portraying bodes well for what is going to be transpiring as Dr. Sleep as well, with Danny Torrance and his past with his father and his mother, and the revelation that he has more family in Dr. Sleep. I'm just amazed at what Flanagan has done with his version of Hill House. And if you've watched it, there's one episode 6, I believe, where it takes place with all the family members in the funeral home. And it's just a showcase of directing, acting, writing, and just jaw-dropping how amazingly well he did that episode, and the whole series for that matter. So that really bodes well for Dr. Sleep, and my excitement level is really going off the charts now because of what I've been seeing from him because of Hill House and Gerald's Game. So I want to delve into Flanagan's filmography in greater depth, and I think I'll do that for the next podcast as well. So look forward to that, and that is the news.
This is great. What's our job? We'd like drive around, pick up stiffs or what?
It's time for reviews from the Nightshift.
So let's take a look at Flight or Fright, the horror anthology co-edited by Stephen King and Bev Vincent, who both have stories in the collection as well. And it's a well-known fact that Stephen King hates to fly. It's not a phobia that I share with him. My phobia with anything that's similar to that is more to do with heights in tall buildings, on bridges, stairs where you can see through the grating, those kind of things. But if I'm in a roller coaster or a plane or there's motion, for whatever reason, the heights don't bother me then. So it's interesting that this is a fear that some people share, obviously. It's kind of like the clown thing with It. I'm not afraid of clowns. So it's rather remarkable to me that King can take these phobias that I personally don't really have and yet still make compelling stories about them, whether it's It or the turbulence expert that we're going to talk about in this anthology. And I found my overall opinion of this anthology was really good. 17 tales, and I liked almost every one of them. I think there's only one that I just outright shook my head at, and that was the fifth column or whatever that one's called. I didn't like that one at all, but that's a nice thing about anthology. There's always the next story to read, and hopefully one that you will like. So everybody will come away with their own favorites. I broke down the categories that are of stories in this collection into about 3 or 4. Sentimental favorites category is my first one, and that deals with stories that I had read previously in other publications. The Air Raid story by John Varley, and of course Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which is really the poster child for this type of story, written by the late, great Richard Matheson, and has been adapted twice, once on the Twilight Zone TV series with William Shatner, and another time with Jonathan Lithgow, who, by the way, is playing Judd Crandall in the new adaptation of Pet Sematary for the Twilight Zone movie. So both adaptations are really good, and I think that they actually improve upon the original short story. So the short story it's always nice to read it again, but I do think the 2 adaptations of his short story improved upon it, and it doesn't have the same impact when you read it as if you watch either the TV episode or the movie segment. So I highly recommend that you check out those 2. The other one, Air Raid by John Varley. I remember reading this short story a long time ago in some science fiction anthology, and I thought it was a really cool concept about the human race living in the future with all the pollution and radiation and whatever that's causing the death of the planet and the human race itself. They're all being clutched together with replacement body parts, and their bodies are just basically falling apart because of all the garbage and whatnot, pollution that's been introduced into the environment. And so they go back in time to accidents in the air where all the passengers are killed and basically round them up like cattle and shoot them back into the future and then send them off to colonize worlds. So in a hope to perpetuate the species because the Earth as we know it is dying. So it's a really cool concept for a story, and Farley later fleshed out that into a full-length novel called Millennium. And some of you might remember it was also turned into a movie with one of Charlie's Angels, escaping me at the moment, Cheryl Ladd. And that movie was released in 1989 and it's directed by Michael Anderson, and the screenplay was done by John Varley as well. And it stars Cheryl Ladd, Chris Christopherson as the airplane pilot, and then unknown General Jay Travanti as Dr. Arnold Meyer, and he was, of course, most famous for Captain Furillo on Hill Street Blues. And the movie is not great, but it was cool to see a short story and novel that I had read actually been turned into a movie, which back in the late 80s was pretty rare. So it's a curio piece for sure, and probably won't translate very well for you younger listeners. But if anybody remembers this story back then, you might want to check out that movie if you've never seen it. So those are what I call the sentimental favorites. I really enjoyed seeing those two stories in here, and they're probably the most famous ones associated with this airplane terror type subgenre. There were some interesting curio pieces in here. The Horror of the Heights by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I had never read it before, but his postulation of a new biosphere basically in the sky way above us, I thought was really cool. And in a lot of ways, it reminds me of what we see today as we try to postulate life on other planets, like, say, Jupiter or Saturn or gas giant planets. Maybe there's these floating jellyfish type creatures that are way up in the atmosphere of these planets because of the gravity being so high. So the parallels between that story and what we're doing today with similar unexplored territory, of course, now being in outer space, I thought that this was a really cool story. We have also the Ambrose Pierce, The Flying Machine, which is just basically almost reads like an ad, and that was an interesting piece. Don't have a lot to say about it except that it just talks about the gullibility of people, and it's something that even back when Pierce wrote this in the late 1800s is around today. So human nature doesn't really change a lot over time. So I found that interesting as well. The other one and this one I just can't believe that I've never heard of this. And it's I believe it's the last story in the collection. It's called Falling by James Dickey. And it's basically a poem based on a true story of a Vesna Volovic. Now the name rings a bell, but the story attached to her I've just totally blanked out on it over time, I guess. But apparently in 1972, she fell reportedly over 30,000 feet and survived. Her plane, she became trapped in her plane behind a food cart or something like that, and the fuselage portion of the plane that she was in crashed into a mountain and through some trees and landed in snow and that. And she was, of course, severely injured, broken bones and whatnot, but she eventually recovered from that. And that served as the inspiration for Dickey to write this poem. And I'm not much for poetry reading, but as King prefaces in the piece for this, there is some really beautiful language in this poem, very powerful imagery, and I was really glad that it was included because otherwise this is a piece that I would have never read on my own. Then we have some other interesting tales. The Flying Machine by Ray Bradbury talks about the invention of a flying machine back in ancient China and the sort of the Pandora's box of once something's discovered, you can never really close it. But there's a nice contrast of this man building this like kite-ish flying machine that went higher than the Great Wall of China that had just been built. And so there's a theme of how technology is constantly superseding previous things and rendering them obsolete. So I really enjoyed that story. There's a really cool locked room mystery story here, Murder in the Air by Peter Tremaine. And that one's about a man that goes to the washroom and is killed in some manner. It looks like he was shot, but the washroom is locked from the inside and nobody can figure out how the crime was committed. And while I enjoyed the concept of the story, I thought the actual solution was a little far-fetched, that a inhaler could be set up to be that powerful to deliver a projectile of that velocity. If anybody out there has proof that this can be done, I'd like to see an article on it. But I found that a little hard to swallow. But overall, I really did like the setup of the crime and everything, and I thought it was pretty cool. Bev Vincent has a pretty good story too, Zombies on a Plane. And I've noticed with Bev, a lot of his stories, the title takes on a totally different meaning by the time you get to the end of the story. And in this particular story, that is once again true. And I found this one quite an enjoyable read. But without a doubt, my two favorite pieces in this collection are the ones by Stephen King, The Turbulence Expert, and the other one is You Are Released by Joe Hill. And Joe Hill's piece in this story, our collection, is to me the crown jewel because of not because of the content of the story or the plot of the story, which is a plane being up in the air during a nuclear holocaust, but it's just the mastery that he displays in shifting points of view between the various passengers and crew of this plane that's in the air while the nuclear engagement is ongoing. It's just amazing. And after the first POV switch with some of these characters, the next time you go back to them, you don't even have to know their name because each one is so uniquely different from the other one. And I just think that this is just a showpiece for a writer at the top of his craft to be able to seamlessly flip between so many point of views and now take the reader out of the story is something to behold, and just a fantastic piece. Stephen King's The Turbulent Expert is interesting in that, especially with Elevation coming up, which I haven't read at this point, but from what we're hearing is an uplifting tale. So is The Turbulent Expert. I really like this tale, and it's uplifting, and yet it's not maudlin or saccharine. This is my type of story where there's victory, but it comes at a cost, or power that entails a cost. And then this particular story, the protagonist of the story is able to absorb or control moments of terrible turbulence and allow all the passengers on the plane to survive it. Yet he has to experience the accident as if the plane did not survive the turbulence that it hit. So this is a really powerful story in that perspective. I really enjoyed the message, and I just like stories where victory comes with a cost. And it sounds like these guys get a lot, because there's apparently a group of these people. Who knows? This could be a good jumping board for a novel as well. They get a lot of perks. They get basically all their desires and needs fulfilled in between these flights, but the actual price of carrying out their duties exacts a heavy psychological, emotional toll on them, and it's something that's very wearing on them. So I really like this story quite a bit too. It's a more straightforward story than Joe Hill's, which I think has just a lot more technical mastery to it, but King has created a pretty cool story here, and I'm really glad to have Joe Hill and Stephen King in the same collection. It's too bad Owen didn't have a story in here as well, but overall it's a really solid collection, and I highly recommend it to you all. And feel free to let me know which tales you liked in particular and which ones you didn't, because I'm always curious to see where the two ends of the bell curves come in terms of readers' reactions to stories in an anthology series. So that's my review of Flight or Fright. And for you brave and daring who pick it up and read it on a plane, I believe Ben Vincent is asking for people to take pictures of them doing so. So if you got a flight coming up, grab this book and take a picture and send it to Bev. That's my review of Flight or Fright, and I'm really looking forward to King's next book, Elevation. All right, so let me know, guys, what did you think of this series, collection? Turning now to TV, Castle Rock Season 1 has come and gone and is quickly disappearing behind us in our rearview mirror. But at this time, the second season of Mr. Mercedes is there to occupy our time. And while at the time of this recording, the series has been done, I'm just going to review episodes 2 through 6. Hans and I had talked about the first season, and we were enjoying the setup for it and the promise of what it was offering, especially with the additional cast in the terms of the Doctor, who is an actor that I was not familiar with until this series, and that's Jack Houston. He's, and in many ways, carried the bulk of the series on his shoulder, even more, I find, than Brian Gleason has done with his, or Brendan Gleason, sorry, with his title character, Bill Hodges. So it's been interesting. The focus has been a little, or this adaptation, I guess you could say, is a different take on the book, and the whole subplot of Brady being able to use the portable video game system to hypnotize people into doing things on his behalf hasn't really been explored nearly as much in this season. We've gotten several subplots that have been added, and through episodes 2, which was called Let's Go Roaming, episode 3, You Can Go Home Now, episode 4, Motherboard, episode 5, Andale, and episode 6, Proximity. The bulk of these episodes have been focused on getting Brady to regain consciousness through this experimental drug that Babineau's wife is pushing him to use, Bora, and she's played by Tessa Ferrer. She's a bit of a one-note character. That's probably the only offset there, that because I think Babineau's doing a really good job, Jack Houston that is, that she drags his scenes down a little bit. And this is a doctor that, I like the portrayal of his doctor in that he's initially in it for the advancement of science, and for the most part through these episodes he still is, but you can see that the situation is getting out of his grasp, out of his control, as he's being pushed on one side by his wife, and then on the other side by Hodges and the hospital administrator, the DA, to let either Brady die or transfer him to a low care facility where he won't bother anybody again. So that's been the main tension of the series. And of course there's always Hodges' obsession with Brady. That's the parallel driving force. And I think they're doing a bit better job of setting up tension between Hodges and Brady, but than they did in the first season, where I think it got lost. And I know a lot of people like the first season, and I'm one of the outliers. I thought the first season really meandered a lot. I think the amount of meandering that's been going on in the second season is quite a bit less. I do think the subplot with Brady and his ex-wife is just really padding for the second season. I really don't, I'm not invested in that relationship, and I can't remember if in these episodes, I think that was probably coming later, where they're talking about going to Ireland together. That seems a little bit, it doesn't cast Hodges in a good light when it's obviously let to his neighbor, played by Holland Taylor, his next door neighbor, or who's playing Ida Silver, is interested in Brady, and he's either deliberately being stupid or he's just dumb and he doesn't see that she has feelings for him. And that's subplot that I really could do without in this series to date. And the episodes that we're dealing with the nurse that was looking after Brady, that was pretty interesting, and that was pretty shocking when she jumped off the hospital roof. And of course, then we've got Brady, who's in the basement of his house, which is a nice metaphor for where Brady is in his mind, we assume. And I'm not sure at this stage how they're going to get him out of the basement per se, because this depends on how close they follow the book, obviously, but they're not really playing up the video game aspect of the story, the hypnotizing aspect of the story very much. And hopefully that will come to fruition in the later episodes. But right now I'm wondering, between that and the apparent lack of Brady or Hodges's cancer showing up, it doesn't seem like they're going to follow the book in that respect. So it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the season plays out. There's been some stuff with Lou, who's come back this season as well, and she's playing a much bigger part in the series than I thought she would. So that's an interesting change as well. And then I think we've got this fake drama with Jerome coming back, and his grades aren't that great at school. Not one of my favorite storylines. And in general, I don't think that they're using the cast or characters that work with Hodges, Holly and Jerome, to the best of their abilities. Especially Holly, she's just really been a nag more than anything else this season, and which is kind of disappointing, because she's obviously got a very analytical mind, and that we saw that to even a greater extent in the King's Knot book this year, The Outsider. So I was hoping for a little more of Holly being involved in the investigations. It was funny though with Hodges having her on doing stakeouts and things like that, which she's totally not really equipped for. But and she takes him literally, so there were some good moments there. So overall, the strength of this season lies with the new characters to a large degree, and not with the ones, especially from the books, the Hodges, Holly, and Jerome trio, which is a little bit disappointing. But the pacing has definitely been better than the last season. And even in the opening titles, I really enjoy that, even though it's a repeating one as opposed to the individual ones they created for the episodes last year. I do like the montage of Hodges sitting in the hospital with Brady, and it's even out of sequence because in some shots Brady's head is shaved, and in other ones he's got a head of hair. So, but just the little things that Hodges is doing there with his coffee, reacting to his coffee, and offering Brady some of his yogurt and stuff like that. I always get a kick out of that. So overall, I'm enjoying this season more than the first season, and I know for a lot of people that's probably not going to be true. But we'll see how the show finishes off the season with the next handful of episodes. And I've been hearing rumblings about those episodes have even strayed further from the book than the first group of episodes. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how and where they changed it. I'm thinking that Hodges is not going to have cancer this season. Doesn't look like it. And I'm wondering if they're going to maybe set this up so that they're going to be doing The Outsider. But we'll have to see how things go in the remaining handful of episodes for season 2. So overall, I'm enjoying the season. Definitely enjoying it a lot more than the first season of Castle Rock, if you want to use that as a yardstick. But I still don't think that this series is using the characters to their full potential. And I think the focus should be more on Holly, Jerome, and Bill than it is on the new characters that they've introduced, which is puzzling to say the least. And I realize that with adaptations, you have to change things around in that, but your focus should still be on the main characters from the book, not these new characters. So that's my thoughts on the series so far for this season. I'd be curious to hear what you guys think. What do you think of this season? Do you like it more than the first season? Do you like it less? Are you happy with the direction things are going? Feel free and let me know. And in our next podcast, we'll be talking about the remaining episodes from season 2. So there we go, folks. That is episode 94 of the Stephen King podcast. Stay tuned for episode 95. I'll have a couple of guests on with me to bounce conversation off of. We're going to be going over the remaining, or I will be going over the remaining episodes of season 2 of Mr. Mercedes. We'll hopefully have some guests on to talk about the Maximum Overdrive Collector's Edition Blu-ray that just came out, as well as based on the recent Netflix The Haunting of Hill House series. I really want to go over Mike Flanagan's filmography and do a little projection and expectations of what he's going to be able to do with Dr. Sleep, which has a lot of the same dynamics of family issues that he did with The Haunting of Hill House. So that should be for an interesting discussion, talking about Mr. Mike Flanagan. And is he going to be the next Frank Darabont or Rob Reiner as a director of Stephen King material? It'll be interesting to see and to speculate. So hopefully you'll all be around for the next episode to check those out. And as always, stay safe, but stay scared. Bye-bye. The end. Boo.